All right. I don't remember what date it was, probably early 2000s. And I don't remember the time of day, but I remember it was sunny. We were coming back from either the range, the 5th Division range, or some sort of motor assignment. And we were coming up to the downtown tunnel in Norfolk. And there was another trooper that was in a car on 264 that would be eastbound that had two motorcycles that were not stopping for him. So he was calling that in, and you could hear the sirens, and they were coming towards the downtown tunnel. So we pull off in that middle cut through right after on the Portsmouth side of the tunnel. So they're coming our direction. And we stopped there, and you said, "Why are we stopping here?" And I said, "There's a pursuit coming through the tunnel, two motorcycles." And you're like, "Oh, okay." So we wait for maybe 30, 40 seconds, and traffic is kind of stopped, but it's still moving along. So I think it was probably 2 p.m. or maybe a little before. And the other trooper says he's going into the tunnel, and the bikes have to come up this rise out of the tunnel. It's a hill, but it's not that much of a hill. I'm not sure if they saw us or not, but we were there with our lights on, two motorcycles. And they got off at that first exit. I think that's called Effingham. It's been some years back now. And gets off onto Bart Street going by. So you're heading towards Effingham with the YMCA on the left. And traffic was stopped at that light. And to turn right there was a stop sign, I think, or a yield sign at least. Anyway, one bike makes it through fine. And the other bike runs into a car. I think he sideswiped it or something and then hit a traffic pole. I think he hit another car and then the pole or like a stop sign. And then he gets off and starts running across Effingham. So we're highly trained and able to drive through traffic. So we drive through, navigate it. You were better on the bike than I was, but I made it through okay. And you go right down Effingham, and I go straight behind the guy because I had been in some pursuits before, and I always thought, why run if you can drive or ride? So riding behind the guy, I'm feeling pretty confident because he's probably got 75 yards, maybe 100 yards of running in already. So he's already tired, I would imagine, unless he runs all the time. And the back part of that gas station, I think it's a Shell station between two churches. There's a big parking lot on the right side, church. That's the direction you were heading. So he jumps on this like a 2-foot wall that goes to a chain link fence and then decides that he can't make it over that. All he had to do was run around it. It was just a barrier. He could have run around it to the street. But anyway, he jumps off of that and then starts running towards that parking lot. So I could have done a 360 on the bike and then kept following him, but I thought, let me just get off the bike and I can probably catch him quicker. So I lay the bike down. I stopped. It wasn't like it was sliding. Just don't put the kickstand out because I didn't have time. So I just lay the bike down and start running after him. So I got the helmet on, the uniform, the belt. You're trying to hold the radio. You got the vest. It's hot. And wearing those riding boots that come up to almost your knee. And the road from the gas station kind of dips down out of that and then goes up a crowned road and in down another little bump into the parking lot. Not a huge deal, but if you're running in boots with heels, it's a problem. So the guy he's running along and he's probably 20 yards in front of me, but I'm pacing myself. So I'm like, I'll be okay. And then I see you out of my right side pulling up beside him. You're still on the bike. And I almost fall a few times going over the ups and downs, but then I get to him and I'm not sure if he fell or if he just saw you and gave up, but my memory on it is not great. But I remember he stops and somehow got him on his knees, putting the handcuffs on, and then you pull up and say, why are you running? And he starts going into this thing about it. And you said, I'm not talking to you. And you looked at me. And that's when I realized you're asking why I was running.
Yeah.
So That's Stephen. Thank you for being here today. Former U.S. Army Ranger, Virginia State Trooper, um, husband, father, farmer, friend. It's good to see you. How you been?
Good to see you too. I remember that event quite clearly. And I remember the guy was still wearing his full face helmet and he was
Mm-hmm.
clearly tired, running around almost, like a lunatic to me. And I kind of figured I was on the bike and I could guide him almost like a calf roping, where the horse runs along to keep the calf going straight or, turn him into you. And then, of course, we got him so quickly that that was just a passing thought. But yeah, I remember that event.
Yeah. Then
Good times,
the other bike, strangely enough, came back to the scene, and
of course.
the other trooper got him too. So
Yeah.
yeah, I don't remember the reason for the pursuit or what happened much after that.
No.
I think we might have worked. I think I worked the wreck, and then the other trooper just took the guy, or the other trooper did it. I don't remember, but yeah, good times.
Yeah. Exciting work.
Yeah. So, what have you been putting your time into? I guess that's probably. I mean, the last time we worked together was probably 2012, mid 2012, and that was probably 2006, 2007, sometime between 2006 and 2012. But
Yeah. Well, I stuck around the state police as long as I could. Finally got fed up with it and left after about 18 years. I was able to retire.
hmm,
And I had moved from Virginia Beach, Norfolk area up to Loudoun County, where we bought a 20-acre plot, and Kelly's kind of turned it into more of a petting zoo rather than a farm. But we do have pigs and chickens and goats and donkeys and horses and cats and dogs and stuff. So since I retired from the state police, I've really been taking care of all of that, uh, from mending fences to chopping wood to feeding animals and that sort of thing. And my wife, she's still working. So with the two retirements, one military, one state, uh, I have I guess, the luxury of a stay-at-home farming dad, farming husband, or whatever.
mm-hmm. I think I've seen some of your videos on Instagram. I don't know if she put them up or you did, of the horses and the goats. The goat seems to be a recurring theme. I don't know. That might have been Facebook back, but yeah.
Yeah, my wife, she puts up a lot of Facebook and Instagram stuff. I don't do too much technology, as you obviously know, based on how long it took to get me on camera here. But
Hmm.
she loves doing that stuff, and it's quite fun. I love the animals. After the work that we've done, and when you get old like I am, you tend to feel like you've met as many people as you really need to, if
Hmm.
that's a nice
Mm-hmm.
way to say it. I got the hang of people. I know the ones I like, and those are good to keep. I don't necessarily feel like I need other ones, but the animals, on the other hand, are just delightful. They're a lot of fun to take care of, and so my job, taking care of, I don't know, 40 animals, uh, while a full-time job, it's a very rewarding and enjoyable job. Much more
Hmm.
relaxing than being in the Army or state police.
Imagine that gives you time to think about things out on the back 40.
Oh yeah.
Uh, you shared recently with me that you were working on a book. And while
Yeah.
we might not want to give up the particulars of the story, this podcast covers a lot of the creative process. So I I know that just from knowing you that you were a teacher before, and I always thought you should write a book about parenting just based on things you talked about, when we worked together. But what's your process for writing this book, and how do you feel it's going compared to life is life working for somebody else versus life working for yourself?
Well, it's funny you mentioned the parenting book because that was actually going to be my first idea. And that was many, many years ago when my boys, who are now in their upper 20s, getting ready to join the military themselves, when they were very young, the art of parenting, in a lot of ways, I thought was the art of distraction. And with the little boys, taking them to a restaurant, taking them on an airplane, you always had to have lots of things to distract them from the boredom or whatever funk they happened to get in at the time. And so I always carried lots of little toy animals or uh, always have some food or other things like that and use my imagination. So when I can see them getting bored at the restaurant, I can pull out a handful of, tiny little toys and we start playing games with those, or on the airplane, think of things to do, drawing, whatever. And so it encompassed my philosophy that parenting with young kids is somewhat the art of distraction. Take their mind, which is easily swayed from one thing to another, from skinning their knee to looking at the chicken on the other side of the fence. And that distraction will quickly render the 3-year-old from worrying about the knee to, oh, that is a neat looking chicken. What color feathers does he have, et cetera, et cetera. I never did write that book. I thought about it, but always was kind of busy working. But the latest idea I've had, and I talked to you a little bit about it, was going to be a book about a trooper here in Virginia, something I know about, who goes rogue and starts doing really bad things as a trooper and hiding evidence of these things underwater. The idea of writing this comes from experience because I was a trooper and I was on the search and recovery team, which does a lot of underwater evidence recovery. And so this guy puts evidence underwater thinking he's hidden it and gotten away with stuff. And he's on the search and recovery team as well. And things don't go as well as he probably hoped in the long run. And of
Mm-hmm.
course, wanting to keep the state police in good stead, instead of one bad guy, this department comes together and ends up catching this guy in a very clever turn of events.
I did like, out of all the jobs I've had, being a trooper was the best. And every job has its issues and its problems, but man, I realized that after I left that in mid 2012 to go out west because my wife got transferred for her job. And then I started working at an academy in Oregon that trains police and corrections. And that's when I realized that I like police, like the people that are police. I mean, every job has good and bad people, but I did like hanging around police and talking to them and things like that. So man, what a great job. I wouldn't, it hurts me a little to hear a story that paints the Virginia State Police in a less than great light, but I understand it's a story.
Yeah, no, it's just a story. It's all fictional. There's nothing based on actual events that led me to the idea of a bad trooper. But having worked in that and having enjoyed the work very much like you did, and liking to be around the troopers and dive team guys and stuff like that, I thought that I could bring some sort of realism to it and factual truth to what being a trooper is like, and make it realistic enough to where people say, man, this guy sounds like he knows what he's talking about. This is interesting. And some of the things that the rogue trooper does to evade capture sooner or reveal that he's the one doing these things. The FBI gets involved. It's become sort of a serial crime story that no one can figure out, partly because the guy committing the crimes is on the inside. and he knows exactly what law enforcement is doing to try and capture him and how he's getting away with it. Um,
How
I
do
don't
you
know.
see the how do you see the story as far as how it's going to be written? Is it like first person, or are you going to go back and forth between those? Have you decided
uh,
that yet?
I don't think it'll be first person. I think it'll be more of a narrative, like so many books I like to listen to on audio, detective stories and things like that. It's not going to be from the criminal's perspective. Uh, it'll be more like a third person, I guess, telling the story of about this guy and about what the state police, what the FBI, what others are doing to try and get a hold of him. Um,
Where are you along in that creative process?
Very, very early. I've got an outline. I've got a lot of story in my head that I've put together, but I guess I'm in a bit of a funk into just sitting down at the computer and just starting to really fill out chapters. Um, so I really need to get on the ball with that, and perhaps this
Do you,
podcast can inspire me to really get to it.
do you use a particular program for writing? Are you writing in Word, or do you have
It's
some
it's
other
on an
different way?
iPad, so it's in Pages, I think.
Hmm.
It's iPad's version of Word.
Yeah. So there's at least one person using Pages.
Yeah, yeah, I think I'm the only one.
Yeah.
Uh,
The first
but
When we first got the Mac years ago, that was our second purchase, was the Microsoft Suite for Mac. After looking at Pages and Numbers and whatever their PowerPoint thing was. But wow. Okay. So you got that going on, you got it in your head. Do you find that, well, I find with stories that you play them through your head so much that eventually they have to get out. So that's when
yeah,
you're like, okay, now I'm going to start writing. But
yeah,
also, if you set some sort of goal per day, is how I did it. And when I wrote that first one, I was trying to do 3,000 words a day, and that's a lot. But I think if you just try to do 300, or even if you're just doing 100, that's something. So at the end of the week, that you got 700, 1,000 more words than you had to start the week.
yeah.
What
I
length? What
watched
length of story are you looking at?
um, um, detective story, maybe 300-400 pages, 12 hours to read, on audiobook kind of thing. Something
Hmm.
that's long enough to get into some good descriptions, very well enough along with the characters. Uh, I picture it frequently as a movie in my head, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
picturing what's happening and trying to describe that in words. My opening sequence, and I'll never forget the first dive I did with the search and recovery team. It's in a lake that was particularly silty and muddy. And the minute your mask dropped below the surface, it was complete blackout. Couldn't see anything. And I'm sinking to the bottom of the lake as part of an exercise to search for a dummy body. And I couldn't really tell how fast I was falling other than the pressure in the ears. I couldn't see
Yeah.
anything, couldn't see my hand in front of my face. And it was that feeling that I'm going to open the book with, except it'll be from a veteran standpoint. And I learned to actually like that sensation rather than be apprehensive about it. And the idea of feeling the touchdown some 30, 40 feet later or more on the silty bottom, and then going to work with your search pattern. You
Hmm.
can't hear much, and what you do hear is muted, and you can't see anything at all. And it's a process that you do by yourself in this search pattern that I'll describe in the book. But it's sort of peaceful, and frequently I did it with my eyes closed because, if you're in a blacked out dark closet, your eyes don't help at all. And underwater, they don't help at all. It's all sensation of feel. So,
You're
the
just
book would
waiting to put your
open with
hand
that.
into a monster's mouth.
Absolutely. Or to catch a fishing hook, or to, broken piece of glass or piece of concrete, or a foot,
Hmm.
and it's that foot that you're looking for if you're doing the recovery.
Hmm.
Or hand, or whatever, part of a body, or a gun. We frequently find guns. Every bridge, I think, in the U.S. has guns underneath it, because criminals, they commit crimes, they're racing home or away from the scene, and they throw the gun out the window as they cross the bridge and say, that's the last time anyone will see that piece of evidence. And of course, it's not.
Yeah, I wonder how often, right when you throw that, you go, "Oh man, I wish I didn't do that. Should have
But
at
see,
least taken it apart."
and the guy in the book, which makes it interesting, is that he knows not to throw something from a bridge. The
Hmm.
things that we never find have been taken much more care into hiding them underwater, realizing that there are professionals trained to search underwater. But where do you start the search? And that's always the key. And most of the time, we start along a route that somebody said, well, I saw him go this away, and
Hmm.
somebody else, it's all based on additional evidence that's brought you to believe, well, there's a chance that he threw it out this window crossing this bridge between the murder scene and his house, where the guy at the house later admitted, well, he didn't have a gun on him when he got here, but
Hmm.
at the murder scene he did. And so it's sort of that deduction. And so we start searches uh, on bridges, bodies of water. People say, well, he likes to go fishing over here a lot, and so maybe we search around that pier or dock. And whether it's the gun that we're actually looking for, or somebody else's, I don't know of a bridge that I've been diving on where I didn't come up with a gun.
Wow. Mm-hmm. The when you said you have an outline for it, and you're operating that in pages, when you are thinking about it and you get an idea in your mind, do you write that idea down or keep it in like notes on your phone or something like that to come back to it
Um,
later?
I try to plug it in the outline where it would be appropriate. Um, whether it's the introduction, or talking about his training, or some of the crimes he commits, or the chase scenes. As you get toward the end, the state police get an idea of who they think this guy is. And in typical fashion, I think they want one of their own. And so they cut out the FBI and others, and it becomes sort of a personal thing with the group of troopers that are trying to zero in on this guy. But when I come up with an idea, I try to plug it into this storyline, um, where it seems appropriate. And then when I get a chance and it's something that really interests me, then I'll develop it more. And I've done that with the intro, the starting scene with the diver first going down below the surface.
Maybe interesting to talk to some of those people that were investigating on the Eastern Shore. Not sure the time frame. It's probably 2010, 2011, when they had all the barns were getting burned or houses
Mm-hmm.
were getting burned.
Yeah.
I can't remember. It definitely before 2012, but I don't remember if I still had. Yeah, that was 2012 because I didn't have the dog then. But that was the only other times I went over to the Eastern Shore was for that.
Yeah. I was on motors then. I assume that you would have, if you were
Yeah,
still in, because I remember we were patrolling during the day because all the troopers assigned to the Eastern Shore were out, looking at night.
that must have been why we were over there then. Yeah, because we
Yeah.
went through that motor school together, and then
Mm-hmm.
you were in motors when I left too. So we were in motors the whole time from what was that 2007 to 12.
Yeah.
Hmm. I found with writing that it helps the difference between a writer and a not writer is writing. So when you get that idea in your mind, even if it's a phrase or a whole scene, I write it down. I used to keep a notepad and write it down, and now I just use the notes on the phone and put it in there. Eventually, you end up with this unwieldy document of random quotes that you're like, oh, that would be good in a scene, or ideas for scenes or whatever. And then you have to print it out and you don't realize that it's 22 pages, but you print it out and you're like, oh, now I got to go through this. And it becomes this thing that's too big to deal with because you have to put it all in the certain spots you want to put it in. And what I usually do is print it out and then cut off, like just take some scissors and cut those pieces of paper up. And then I put them in, like, if it's a quote that this character would say, I put it in a little pile for that character, or, a little stack, and then separate it by characters, separate it by scenes. And then I can go to those little parts and order it. And that helps me keep it straight in my mind for what I want to write about, when I want to write about it. And that helps also to keep going, doing that 300 words or however many words a day you're doing, that you're just showing up at the computer to write, and you have something to start with, or at least something to think about when you're sitting there and you go, oh, okay, well, I'm not sure where to go with this scene, so I can go over to this other scene. And then you start finishing those blocks, and then you can build your story that way. I found that helps.
Yeah, that sounds like a good process. I need to get more self-discipline and really start doing it like that. So I can start every day putting thoughts down on paper, like you said, even if it's just to show up and get something down. Because I've got the whole story just about done in my head, from start to finish and all that. I just got to put it down on paper and refine it so it tells a good tale.
Those were always the good days of writing, when you are there and you're discovering the story as you go. I mean, you have an outline, you have an idea, but then one character says something that you weren't expecting just as writing it, and it feels like that writing is coming from somewhere else, and you're just capturing it at that point. And another thing that helped in stories was when you're thinking about personalities of characters, I always thought about animals I knew. So there's a lot of stories that have, either in a scene, whether it's a main character or not, that that might be a dog that I knew when I was 10 years old, just the personality of that animal. And that's fun to do if you get stuck in a place, or you want to put a character in and not know, how are they? You don't have to spend so much time developing a character. You already know the character.
Yeah.
And of course, with as many people as you met in life, you can use that too. But that's an advantage of living, I guess.
That reminds me of something that you had told me when we were troopers together. When you have a criminal or somebody that you're looking for, rather than trying to describe that person in a lot of detail, think of another person who looks a lot like him and modify that description accordingly. So maybe
Mm-hmm.
the person you're looking for reminds you of Elon Musk or something.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone knows exactly what Elon Musk looks like, but you could say this looks like his older, shorter, heavier brother of Elon Musk. It's okay. That's enough for me to now run out, since we don't have a lot of time, and I've
Yeah.
got the whole story. With a character, if you're thinking of an animal that you already know everything about them, and you apply that to a character in your story, that's a great idea.
Yeah. It just gets those juices flowing, and use the whatever life is, whatever the simulation gives you that we're living, that you've already got that those basic ideas down there. You just have to arrange them a certain way. That
Mm-hmm.
thinking about a person based on someone came from a couple pursuits of chasing people, and then not knowing how to explain it to somebody else, where you're just like, oh, well, they're about 5'8" and brown hair, and you're like, oh, that's not going to do it. That's not going to do it.
Mm-mm.
So I remember the first time I used that was a guy that looked like Robert De Niro. And I said, is Bobby De Niro running through the streets there? You'll know him when you see him. He's
Yeah,
wearing
that's all you gotta
whatever.
say.
And that's the Norfolk found him. And they're like, we got your De Niro guy right here. And the other guy that had him is like, are you talking to him? Are you talking to him? Are you talking
You
to
talking to
him?
me?
Yeah.
Yeah, a little
So
bit, a little bit.
yeah, there's a lot of De Niro things on that arrest.
It's a great way to
Superpowers.
describe somebody or to think of a character. Think of something
Mhm.
you already know, and that's why I came back to the writing about the troopers and about the dive team, and some of the wood stuff will come from my time in the Army. Things that I don't have to think about. I just know what it's like diving in black water. I know what it's like walking around in the woods in the dark, um, and so that part's done. I don't have to try to imagine it. And I think that authenticity you can see in a good book, and you can tell this guy sounds like either he researched with
Mm.
a ton of people for many years what it's like to be a police officer, or he actually sounds like he was. And there's
Mm-hmm.
something about when you become a trooper or law enforcement, and I've been in the military for more than 20 years, but being a trooper is completely different. And I didn't know what it would be like. Your first traffic stop. What's it going to be like? How do you feel about it? Your first pursuit, your first arrest, all of those are unknowns. And writers that haven't done that, haven't physically been alone by themselves at 2 in the morning and pull over a car, four people that don't want to talk to you.
Mm.
How do you deal with that? How do you feel about that? That's hard to make up. And so I thought, well, I better write about something I know, or it'll lack that authenticity and realism that I think makes a good story.
What do you think the big difference is between policing and military?
Well, the military, at least there's a bunch of you. It's not just you. So you'll have a squad of guys, and so you have backup right there on hand. Um, Police work, as I said earlier, and you've done it, I've done it. Everybody who works law enforcement on a midnight shift somewhere, if they don't have a guy in the car with them, and we never did as troopers, you're pulling over a car in the middle of nowhere, no other cars around. You don't know who's in the car, and you have to make that blind approach, and that's can be stressful, and you don't know how they're going to react when you get up there. The military, when you did that, you'd probably have a 50 cal set up on the gun, and you'd have 10 guys on either side of you ready to blow the heck out of the car. And so you're not up
Mm-hmm.
there by yourself alone wondering. You got teamwork, and the individual solo nature of being a trooper anyway was a big difference. And the fact that you're detaining or arresting American citizens and depriving them of their freedom, that's an authority that soldiers don't have. Uh,
Mm.
and so that it's a big responsibility there. But it was really the solo nature of the job. You're out there by yourself, don't know where backup is, uh, and you have to do something that could be, of course, life threatening.
Yeah, I guess that's right. The when you're in the military and you find yourself alone, that's not a good feeling.
No,
But it was easier, I found, policing, just to accept that you're there by yourself, and even if you get into trouble, nobody is going to get there quick enough to help you. So
nope.
it goes back to that, you don't worry about calling it in on the radio so much. I mean, you need to call it in so somebody can be on the way, but if you're in a shootout or whatever, you need to fire and maneuver before you talk on the radio. That you see a lot of people in their pursuits, foot pursuits, worrying about talking on the radio to the detriment of putting themselves in more danger. I know I did the first few times, but
That reminds me of something you told me when you're talking on the radio during a pursuit. Inevitably, and I watch YouTube videos from time to time just to remind me of what those pursuits were like. But the guys start to yell and they start to get excited, and it comes across on the radio, and that doesn't help anyone. And you had always said when you're in a pursuit, pretend you're a DJ on a late night R&B radio station,
mm,
and you're, hey, this is, badge number 12. I'm in pursuit of a black vehicle. We're going southbound on 95. Speed's 105, traffic's clear.
Yeah.
And the people in dispatch, and I got pretty good at doing that based on your advice. And the people at dispatch, is he really in pursuit? This sounds just too cool. The car is crashed. They rolled over. Vehicles fully engulfed in flames. 4 occupants have fled.
Yeah.
And I tried to teach my guys that, comment on the weather. It's a clear night. The stars are out. My speed is 125.
That also keeps them from canceling the pursuit. If you sound like you're out of control, the supervisor, if they get on there, if they're around, is definitely going to stop it.
They're like, I don't believe he's in pursuit. I think he's in the living room. He's watching TV, pretending he's busy.
Yeah. I remember a few where you'd have a pursuit, a trooper is a little more radical and they're kind of a little more excited on the radio, and they are saying, the car's doing this, they're going 100 miles an hour, they're going the wrong way, or something, I'm losing sight of them, they're almost hit something, and you're like, that's too much. That's too much. Yeah. I didn't learn it until I went to the flight school, the aviate, navigate, and communicate. That's what you have to do. First, you're going to drive, and then you're going to figure out what you're going to do to get the person stopped. And then you tell dispatch what's going on. But I had a few of those where, and I'm sure I had times where I sounded too radical on the radio or gave the wrong location. That's easy to do when you're running after somebody and thinking about so much else. That's why I think you don't get on the radio that much. But the guy in a pursuit, or another trooper was in a pursuit, and he's like, he's going down here. He's just real radical on the radio. And then I said, I'm with him now. I'll call the pursuit. So he's usually you'd have the car that's doing the pursuit is just doing the pursuit, and then the person behind him is saying where you are. That's easier. But
right.
This guy, the car goes by that he's chasing, and I don't see the trooper. And I was like, oh, and I'd already said I'll call it when it comes by me. I think this was on 264 westbound. Does 264 westbound past Newtown Road in the city of Virginia Beach going into Norfolk. And we go past the interchange on the outside set. And I still didn't see the other trooper, but he's not on the radio anymore. So I was like, man, I hope he didn't crash. And then I said, I see the car now. We're at this location. And then my next thing I said was, in custody, we're on the right shoulder.
Yeah.
And it wasn't like it was a long time. That guy just, he was very, that particular situation, he was surprised. I think he thought he got away, because when I was behind him, I went in stealth mode, which is, it was whatever at night, and the interstate's lit, but I didn't have any of my lights on. And I just waited till I got up behind him and then turned everything on. And he stopped like halfway in the road, and then he pretty much gave up. So that was good. That was a good outcome. Yeah. And traffic was light. And he goes, man, I was trying to kill myself. And I said, that's the second thing you failed at tonight. One was getting away, and the other. And he's like, man, that's cold. That's cold. I was like, oh, you're okay. You're okay. So let's, you sit them in the front seat when you're in the state police there. We didn't have the cages in the back. So they're in the front seat, get the air conditioner on them, maybe tune in their radio station they want to listen to. So you can start building that relationship of cooperation with them. But
I don't know how many guys, I don't know how many guys I arrested eventually ended up telling me, well, you're the nicest trooper that ever arrested me. And that was always the goal. I got nothing against anyone I'm arresting. And so I would make sure they're comfortable in the car. I'd put on their music. We'd chat about whatever. Mm-hmm. It was good.
I did have a few foot pursuits where, when we were doing checking details, they're, I can't remember all the exits now, but I think this was Lynn Haven or something like that. There's a McDonald's right off of it. I think that's Lynn Haven. And we were doing this checking detail. So we had traffic backed up a little, 4 or 5 cars, and they come up, you stop them when you're on the on-ramp, check their license, make sure they're licensed, make sure the car is okay, and then they go on. And I look back and I see just the back of a guy's head going down the line of cars, because he's obviously left his car in the lane and just running away now. So I was like,
Right.
oh man. So I get in the car, back down the ramp, and I see him go into the McDonald's. I think this is Lynn Haven. And I was like, man. So I run in the McDonald's. It's like 10 in the morning on a Saturday morning. It's packed. And I'm just looking around. They're all looking at me because I ran up to the door and then I just enter slowly. And they're all looking around. And then they look in towards the bathroom, and then they look at me, and I'm like, oh, okay. I'm going to go check the bathroom now.
Got it.
So
He's in the bathroom.
I go in and check the men's room. Nobody's in there. I knock on the women's room door. Nobody answers. So I go in, and I think at that point I might have had the gun out, just clearing the corners. And then this other guy comes in with a fanny pack, this white guy with a fanny pack, and he unzips it and pulls out a gun, and he's like, FBI. And I was like, what are you doing? He goes, what am I doing? I was like, that's right. And I holster and I walk out. That's the last time I saw him. And I look out through the crowd down the sidewalk, and I see the guy walking away. And I was like, oh, there he is. So I get in the police car and I drive over to him, and I was like, hey man. He's like, what? I go, hands up. He goes, all right, okay. You got me. So I get out, cuff him, search him, put him in the front seat. I think that is also one of the reasons why it's easier to be nicer to people, is because they're right there beside you. So we definitely had nasty people, and you have to put the violent prisoner restraint on them, and maybe put a mask over them so they don't spit on you or bite you or all that. But not very often that happened. Usually you could build a pretty good rapport with people. And I get this guy, and it was hot that day. I was pouring sweat and he was sweating. And I think he tried to go get something at McDonald's, but he didn't. He was like going to blend in and get like a McMuffin and then leave, but he didn't. I guess he saw me come in and go to the bathroom, but I didn't see him. He was shorter. So I get him in the car, and I was like, man, it's hot. He goes, yeah, it's hot. I'm thirsty. I was like, all right, so we went through the drive-through since we were going to jail. Went through the drive-through. I got him a drink and a straw, and I got a drink, and he's sitting there in the front seat handcuffed. But then whenever I would take a drink, I'd just give him the drink too. So it worked out pretty good. I think he had some nice words to say when we got down there. He just had a suspended license. No huge deal, but I guess you get scared when you don't know what's going to happen to you.
Yeah.
Certainly not a reason to run, but
my best story of making a guy that I'd gotten in a fight with happy, I guess, or content with what was going on. I won't make it a long story, but his daughter ran out of gas. Another trooper was, behind him calling a tow truck for her, and she was all bent out of shape for whatever reason, called mom and dad. And anyway, dad eventually gets there, runs across 264 middle of the night, and I see him. I was the second trooper. I'm back in my car, minding my own business, just kind of providing lights. And this guy comes running around, starts yelling at the tow truck driver. And he's standing in the lane, the far left lane, the fast lane, so to speak. And I get out of my car as soon as I see him running across the other side of the interstate. And I basically had to tackle him and move him to the front of the tow truck to save his life, because cars were flying by us at 70 miles an hour. I didn't tackle him. We didn't go to the ground, but I violently moved him to the side and let him go. He said, you're about to get killed. And that's when he spun around on me and, put his fists up, said he's going to kick my ass and all this sort of stuff. And we had a knockdown brawl for a while. And it was something else. Yeah. And his pants were tore up. His shirt was tore up. He's bleeding from the knees and elbows. I'm bleeding, from my hands. And I finally get him contained. The other trooper had to jump over the Jersey wall. He's dealing with the daughter, but we get him contained, and I sit him back against the Jersey wall. And, I had to call the sergeant and tell him I've had a use of force, got an injury, going to jail, all that. And we get to jail, and my sergeant showed up. He has to take the pictures and interview the guy. And he's looking at this guy whose clothes are torn up. He's bleeding from, every limb. I'm all messed up. And the sergeant asked the guy, what happened? And he said, it's not the trooper's fault. It's my fault. I'm not hurt. The trooper didn't do anything wrong. I'm sorry. And I'll never forget the sergeant looking turning slowly to look at me as if, what voodoo have you done to
Yeah.
convince this guy who obviously needs medical, or at least, scraped up knees, torn up,
Yeah.
to say, yeah, no, I got no complaint. It's my fault. I shouldn't have done what I did. The trooper's just doing his job. And
Yeah.
and it was all because, like you were saying, you build that rapport, even if it's after a fight and after arrest. And I explained to him exactly what was going on. His daughter was in no danger. We were there to help him. She hadn't even been pulled over. She'd run out of gas. And he's like, well, that's not what she told me. That may or may not be. And made sure he was warm enough, put on some music, explained everything to him. Once it was explained to him, he's like, yeah, I'm sorry. And that's what, eventually half hour later when he talked to my sergeant, he's like, yeah, sorry, I was out of the line.
Yeah. I think a lot of that comes from, I guess, obviously the hiring process and the training. You gotta give it to that, the type of people they hire and how they train you to talk with people, but also that you have the person sitting up front when you do arrest them. And most of the time, anyway, when you're working in interstate area, your arrests are probably going to be a majority of DUIs, and you're going to want them to cooperate so you can do the breath test, and you just don't want to be at lockup forever dealing with them. You want things to go smoothly, so you have to start establishing that rapport immediately. The only time I ever thought it was okay to mess with somebody is if you're messing with somebody else's prisoner, because that's going to bring them together,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
they're going to get mad at me. The other trooper's going to get mad at me, and I'm going to be like, okay, all right,
Oh
so they're
yeah, you
happy.
betcha. I'm just here from the Canadian Mounties here observing the state police there. What'd you do,
Yeah.
young fella? Part of the
Yeah.
problem I'm having with this book I'm writing is that the trooper is just an abhorrent criminal, a despicable human being. And I'm having a hard time, putting him in the uniform that you and I wore and having
Yeah.
him do the things he did as a trooper. But I
Yeah.
think it's going to make for a really good story. But boy, howdy, it's not the way, you know, troopers ever behave. I
It
mean, this guy
sounds like
goes,
you have to explain it as a, multiple personality at
eh,
least, or some
and
type of
that's a good
situation
way
like
to,
that.
yeah, maybe I could do that because the
You take
hiring
somebody.
process, is supposed to root out serial criminals.
Yeah, you
And
get some weird ones every now and then, but yeah.
you shouldn't get this. The guy in this book should never become a police officer, obviously. And so
Right.
I haven't quite figured out whether there's going to be an event that changes him after he became a trooper to make him,
Hmm.
his personality just snap and the dual personality take over. Or, if he's very clever and he knows that, well, if I become a trooper, I can get away with stuff. I haven't resolved that part of the book yet. What causes this guy to
Hmm.
go off the deep end? And that I'm still trying to develop that because I mean, it's not your average trooper that drives too fast to lunch. It's a serial
Well,
criminal.
that's training. That's
That,
training.
well, of course, yeah, that can be
Yeah. Okay.
explained with
Yeah.
appropriate,
Noble cause corruption. Yeah.
yeah.
The continuum of compromise.
If you can
Yeah.
articulate it well, you can explain away a lot of things.
Yeah. The
Um,
when I think it's changed sometime, the definition between psychopath and sociopath. But what I remember from when I was in school, middle school, high school, whenever we went over this stuff, and certainly in college doing the like administration of justice things, community college there, and J. Sergeant Reynolds in Virginia. But the the difference was a psychopath is a person that doesn't have empathy but can blend in. So it looks like a regular person, sounds like a regular person. They just don't care about anyone. And then the sociopath is the person that doesn't have empathy but can't fit in. And I think somewhere along the line that got changed, or either I heard it wrong back then. But I think that's, you could explain it as either it's the psychopath. So that was their goal
yeah,
from the
because he
beginning
clearly
was,
blends in.
yeah. Or it's a injury. You got a little CTE thing going on, or sort of maybe from being in the dive team, something happened and then they got some sort of mental problem from that, or either that changed the way they thought somehow. I don't know.
Yeah.
Seems easy to explain that way. You just say everything was good up to this point, then they got hit on the head, or they were in a crash, or they were deprived of oxygen, or something happened, and then
I was thinking of having it slowly develop as a result of some of the stuff that he sees as a trooper that most people don't see, whether it's drunks running over children, or and then having no empathy the drunk, or you see a lot of crime and you see a lot of behavior and stuff that other people never see firsthand, and you're the one that's called to try and deal with it, and perhaps that develops an inner demon in him that he then loses control of.
Yeah, that could work. That could work. I definitely think that policing is a younger person's game, but maybe not younger as in age, but more of in you have a specific time that, depending on how bad of stuff you see or what you deal with, there's a limit to how much you're going to take before you're like, okay, that's good enough. I mean, you were in it longer than I was. I think I had 14 and a half years, and I would have liked to have gotten to the 20, but wife won out the contest of whose job is more important when she was making so much more than me, which isn't hard when you're a trooper. But the yeah, I feel like that's a way to explain it, is that I like that it happens over time, and it's just from that, either going down that continuum of compromise or noble cause corruption or whatever they want to call it, when police start to do things that they shouldn't do, when you see people get away with stuff so much. But I was fortunate to not see so much bad. But yeah, I could see it. It's an adjustment after you get out to be a regular person in the world again. So that takes like a year and a half. I'm not sure how long it took for you to get used to people driving by you, or to
Yeah.
not acting
I,
when you see something wrong.
it's funny. I used to play a game. Why would you pull that guy over? I played that game with my wife because we played that game. Why do
Mm-hmm.
you want to pull that guy over? And you'd come up with whatever it was. And now I see people doing stuff that I just couldn't have let go, of course, as a trooper, and I could care less. And I don't
Yeah.
drive fast anymore. I mind my own business, and I really try to mind my own business. And when I see people doing stuff on the road, I ignore it. But I've yet to have an occasion where, as a retired old man with a beard, uh, that I feel compelled to take action because I can't ignore it, even as a civilian, a retired guy. And that hasn't occurred, which I'm thankful for, partly because I never leave my farm.
Mm. Well, you have too many animals to take care of. You don't have any time to
Yeah.
leave.
Yeah, that comes back to the part about where I've met as many people as I feel I really need to.
Mm. Mm. So then, creative process wise, seems like you have the time to think a lot, and a lot of material to draw from as far as stuff. Do you think that this character will have any like past military, or
I
you
was
keeping it
thinking of
separate?
that. I was thinking of that. Maybe he did a 4-year stint in one of the services, and then he joins. A lot of the guys that in my academy class had that sort of 4 years where they'd been in the service, one of the services for a few years, but they were all very young. I was by far the oldest guy in my academy class and the only as a military person. Um, I mean, I was most of these guys' father's age when I was in. I was 42, I guess, when I started, and you're dealing with 21-year-olds at the youngest
Mm-hmm.
side of the house. Um, but
Yeah, I'm glad that I went to the academy before I went to the military to do the reserves. Number one, I had enough leave saved up from being a trooper that I could get paid while I was at Paris Island doing push-ups. So you get paid as a trooper on leave and paid as a, E1 or so that made it easier. You're getting paid twice.
Right.
But it did become a time where you'd have to choose which one are you going to do at this point. So I'm glad I joined the military, and it was definitely not what I thought it was going to be, but I would probably do it again. And then the policing, as I said before, was just the best job because you were trained to act, and there was no question of whether you're going to do something if you saw something wrong. It's
Right.
you're going to do that. You're going to take care of that. You're going to, yeah. That's
And
the
it's
great part about
exciting. I
policing.
mean, it's fun work. You're outside, you're not in an office, you're not behind a computer screen. For the most part, you have one, but I mean, you're out driving around looking for trouble,
Yeah. Being
putting an
nosy,
end to it.
look for trouble, solving problems. That's my
I
three things I
really
talk about
enjoyed
with
that
policing.
part of our talks when we'd have lunch together and we're talking about what would you do if,
Yeah.
let's say you're driving through the projects or something in Norfolk and you see a trunk on a car that's not latched all the way. It's open a couple inches and there's kids playing, over here and there's people doing stuff over there, but there's no one really by the car. Do I have any authority to open that trunk? I think we've actually had this discussion. And what would my
Yeah.
basis be? And what if I found something in that trunk? What was the purpose? And would it be lawful for me to stop my car, look around, not see anyone, getting groceries out, wait a long enough time so that, someone who was getting things in and out would have come back? Nothing like that. I just see a trunk that's cracked open. Can I open that?
Yeah.
It's part of the being nosy, being a community caretaker. Of course I can, in my opinion, because it presents a hazard. And there's kids around that could come over and open the trunk, fall in, or get in and close the trunk. So from that aspect, I'm not looking for a crime so much as why is this trunk open? Do I need to secure it? Maybe there's valuables in there that the person meant to lock the trunk and they haven't. And so those are subject to theft, all sorts of what ifs. And then if I open the trunk and there's nothing in it, do I lock it or do I shut it or what do I do from that point? Or what if I find, drugs or guns or a body, so was that a lawful search? But we did a lot of that. What if?
That's the difference, I think, for that next level policing. And I think that also goes into the ability to tell stories too, be a storyteller, not in a like a lying way, but like in a way that paints that picture for explaining the situation where as a police you're thinking I'm explaining it to a jury or to a judge of why I did what I did. Do I have the legal right to be where I am and do what I did? But just going through all those what if scenarios makes you react or act that much quicker. Like I'm in the mall and somebody comes in with a rifle and they start shooting. What am I going to do? So you don't have to think about that stuff. And that's the great part about policing, especially when you have good training, which I think the Virginia State Police had great training, and I'm glad that I started there. And that's the difference of regular, you're just out there seeing, reacting. And then the other one is the proactive police of being out there, as you said, the community caretaker. But you don't, there's so much less, it may be a fraction of a second, maybe a few seconds of this is what I'm going to do. And then if
Yeah.
you're sitting somewhere with another police, you talk to them about it, or you're sitting somewhere with your spouse, you talk to them about it. Hey, if this happens, this is what you do. Or you get the feeling when something happens, somebody comes in and it's weird, and you just say to them in the middle of the conversation, if this person starts shooting, you go here, I'm going there. So you have
I,
those
I, I
plans
used to
already.
love I used to love talking about those scenarios with you. My wife didn't much care for it because she thought I
Huh.
was just being ridiculous. And so instead of me going over all these scenarios, she learned that if I said, "Hey, let's go," she wouldn't, if we're outside in line at the grocery store, for instance, or we're walking into a restaurant to get a table and I say, "Hey, let's go." She
Hmm.
just goes. She knows, well, he'll explain to me when we're outside why we're just leaving our groceries here and going out to the car, or why this restaurant that we wanted to go to and we talked about going to, we now get there and before we're even seated, he says, "Hey, let's go
Hmm.
somewhere else." And so we don't have that discussion there. She just knows that I've probably thought of something or seen something. And one time that reminds me, and sometimes I won't even say, "Hey, let's go." I'm just going to say, "I'll meet you at the car." And this
Hmm.
was, we were checking out at a Whole Foods, and the cashier was a girl I'd had a difficult traffic stop with. And I recognized her basically before we got up to it. And she's being perfectly normal as a cashier in Whole Foods weeks later. And I told my
Hmm.
wife, "Hey, I'll meet you at the car." And I left without even going through that line that we were already lined up for. And she's like, "Okay." And I explained it to her later. Obviously, I don't want to meet that young lady again at the grocery
Yeah.
store. Same thing happened at a restaurant where a guy I had arrested was working as the guy that clears the tables, not a waiter, but a whatever they
Busser.
are, busser. I
Hmm.
saw him at bussing a table, and I'm like, "Yeah, we're not going to eat here." I
Hmm.
arrested that guy 3 weeks ago for X, Y, or Z. But I didn't explain all that, and I didn't have to because she knew enough to say, when I said, "Hey, let's go somewhere else." "Okay."
Hmm.
And he'll explain later. But I'm
Yeah. It's good to
always
have.
thinking of scenarios.
Yeah. That that helps that attention to detail too. And that's also helps with the explaining people or how they look based on people you already know or famous people. So if you have to tell somebody else what's going on,
Hmm.
and I think that has helped in storytelling too. And you can see it in writing. You can read it and when you're writing or when you're reading a book, but I can think of two films like the Tom Cruise War of the Worlds. I think it's War
Hmm.
of the Worlds. Yeah, where the things are just starting to come out of the ground and he's looking up at it and just that disbelief look. You go, wow, he nailed that. He nailed that. I really believe that he's looking at something he's never seen before. That's really good. And then another one is in Full Metal Jacket when Cowboy is out on the obstacle course. I think it was the confidence course. The obstacle course is the shorter one. So the confidence course, and the drill instructor is yelling at Private Pile because he can't get over the obstacle, and it just focuses in on Cowboy's face, and he's just standing there, blank face, just looking. And I'm like, oh yeah, I got that. I mean, I didn't understand that before I went through boot camp, but I got it after that. I was like, oh, okay. Somebody captured that feeling. And I don't
Yeah,
know if you get it as a regular person, but if you have been through things like that, you're like, oh, that hits home. So if you can do that in writing and in storytelling or even in photography, that's that connection, that extra connection, the next level that you don't get if you don't think about things like that.
definitely. Yeah, that's the sign of a true artist, I think, or creator that can do that convincingly. And I may have a good story, but I might not have the knack for turning it into something brilliant like that. But the ones that are very good at capturing those looks, feelings, moods, and relaying them either in words or photos or music, even. I mean, anyone with that great creative ability can make the audience just stop and go, "Wow, yeah, I'm there."
Yeah. That series that takes place in Kentucky with Raylan Givens, Justified.
Hmm.
Have you ever seen that? Have you seen that
Yeah,
series?
I've seen a bunch of them.
I have a list still in my phone of Justified quotes, and I saw that after I wasn't policing anymore, but it was I was doing the training in Oregon at their public safety place, and you had to do characters sometimes. I was a tactical and skills instructor, and you were playing a character, and I played Win Duffy. Win Duffy was my name a lot, and I would try to put in justified quotes every now and then when I was doing that, or if I was teaching us a defensive tactic class or something, or they would say something to me because they all made fun of my accent, which of course I don't think I have an accent. And when they tried to do the Southern accent, it was terrible. But I would put those quotes in, and yeah, that's the authenticity that it needs. So it's those little details and stories. You don't have to do it too much, but just enough.
Yeah. I love those, that sort of thing. It's interesting when you use a quote too to see if the audience knows it. And a lot of the time there'll be someone in the audience that does, and he gets it, and everybody else is staring at you like you just shot a blank. They don't know what you're getting. But every now and then you'll see somebody and they're like, oh yeah, I watched Psych also, or Justified, or Suits, or whatever. Any of those shows that have some pretty good one-liners.
Yeah, when I write, if I use a quote like that, like if it's a fiction thing, The Princess Bride, I use some of those every now and then, but I'll put it in italics with the single quote around it instead of the double, just so I can say, look, I understand that's not my word, but my character is saying that. And I don't want to. How often in regular conversation do you cite your quote after you say it? But I mean, like, if you said to someone, are you still cross? We can't be friends. If we weren't friends, I just don't think I could bear it. I mean, come on, that's from Tombstone. And when you say it to a cowboy server when you're visiting Tombstone, hope they get it.
You'd think so.
But when we were there, I did pay with dollar coins, and that brought him to tears. Anyway. So then, working on the book, got anything else going on besides farming and thinking about your story?
Well, I went on a motorcycle, went to the BMW Riders National Rally last weekend. I was out in West Virginia. That was kind of a fun thing to do. We had ridden together a lot ourselves, and I thought this would be a fun thing to do. There's over 1,000 BMWs there.
What do you do at those things? Just talk to other bike people or do stuff?
Well, I camped out. You eat together, you talk to people, and then they have scavenger hunts and they have skills contests. Sometimes they didn't at this one. And mostly you just ride around. They did it in a place where there's just wonderful riding. And I got in with a group of guys that had plotted out me to ride along with them. And so I did that for a couple hours before I had enough of that and said, well, thanks. I'm going to go off on my own a little bit, and did that. But it's mostly just the camaraderie, looking at bikes, being around guys that ride bikes, being in a place where there's good riding. It is a fun time.
No hotels there, though.
Oof. They have them. They do.
Oh, okay.
I chose to camp. I think there's more camaraderie with the campers because they all tend to sit outside, their tent. And the tent's it's set up like a refugee camp of wealthy BMW owners. But you talk a lot more when you're at a campground than you do in a hotel. And so I thought the camping would be fun.
That when we did that Blue Ridge Parkway ride, however many years ago that was, the idea of setting the tent up after those days was not, the idea of it was cool, but then when it came down to it's wet and getting dark, and now you're going to set this up and there might be bears and the bathroom's up the hill. Yeah. That's
I don't do that very often. And when Kelly and I ride, we get a hotel. And frankly, I'm getting too old to sleep on the ground if I expect to be able to bend straight the next day. But for this time, I thought, well, I'll try it. But usually you're right. I'm looking for a bed and hot shower after a day riding.
All right. Well, I think we can finish this up here. We had a little bit of some glitches. Your phone dropped out. I don't know if you could see it every now
Yeah.
and then, but it seemed like it caught back up pretty good. So I think we're in good shape on that. You got any, I guess you're not to the point where you have social media for getting your book out there or anything like that. Are you looking at doing like Amazon KDP publishing, or what kind of publishing were you going to do?
That's still farther out than I'm thinking. Once I get a book written, then I'll worry about, what do I do with the book? I haven't thought about how I was going to publish it yet. I really liked reading your books and the way that you had published them online, and I could just download them from Amazon or whatever and read it that way. Of course, I like the hard copy, but
Yeah.
I
I
don't know. I
haven't
haven't thought about publishing.
I haven't done any audiobooks yet, but I feel like that's probably something to consider doing. And seems like people that listen to those like the person that wrote it to read it. So maybe consider that for your thing too. I don't know. I haven't really listened to an audiobook. I either read it. Yeah, I read it, but I don't know if you put in like different voices. Do you pretend like, do you do a little more high pitch if you're doing a different voice, or do you have sound effects? That'd be the part that I wouldn't know on an audiobook.
I listen to audiobooks all the time, and Kelly and I will listen to them when we're driving, and it just makes the time fly by. So when we're driving from here to Colorado, that's about 24 hours worth of behind the wheel time. And that's
Mm-hmm.
2 solid audiobooks, and we can start it right after breakfast and listen to the book straight on through to the end. And on a good book, we're both like, well, we don't want to stop yet. We want to hear
Yeah.
the final chapter or whatever. And I've heard them done a variety of ways where they use different people, and it sounds more like a old time radio show where they
Mm-hmm.
have the characters and they have the sound effects and things like that. And I've heard a lot that I think are done quite successfully where the person just alters his voice a little bit. And then the woman came in and the old lady said this or that. And it's a little corny at first, but it helps with the flow. I've rarely heard an audio book where I'm like, oh, this is just terrible. I can't listen to it because of the
Oh,
way
okay.
he's reading it.
I like as far as self-publishing goes, I do like Amazon's way of doing it, where you can make your own cover. You can get somebody else to do the cover. You have that artist corner or wherever where you can put information about your book or other books that you have. So I'm be interested in reading some drafts here soon. So I expect expect
Sure.
some pages.
Sure. Yeah, I guess I really got to get motivated and start putting it down in pages.
Yeah, just do a little bit at a time.
Cool.
All right. Well, we're going to go ahead and close this out. I'll talk to you on the other side of this. All right.
You bet.
All
Enjoyed
right.
it.
Yep. Thanks for being here.